Hello Patreon friends, this month we are going to be talking about all things framing fiber art. So I use a couple of different methods to frame my fiber art. I'm going to cover 3 of those today in our video. So the first one that we're going to talk about is the way that I frame my pieces in these pre-made frames that I buy online that are meant for regular art, flat art. They actually come with plexi in front of them that we will take out, and I will include links to these. The second way that we are going to talk about today is how I frame my art in custom frames that I've had made. So unfortunately I don't have a link for you all to go and buy these, but maybe understanding a bit about this process will inspire you to create your own frames. So we will cover that method as well. And then the third way we're going to go over is how I back pieces in ready-made embroidery frames. So this is the same way that I would back anything that I put into an embroidery hoop or any of the pre-made frames that are specifically for embroidery and fiber work. Auburn Hoops has recently closed up their shop, so this specific frame is not available, but I have some other ones that I will be linking in the description or in the post of this, so that way you can see them all in the same place. So I've got 3 pieces here. This one is already framed, but this one is yet to be framed. It's just sitting on the mat board. And so we're going to start with this one and then work our way through the other 2. For these frames that I buy online, they pop out unless they're a larger size. They have screws. And so it comes with the outer frame portion, the backing, and then what comes with it inside is a piece of paper, a little piece of mat board, and plexiglass covered in a film. I don't end up using any of these 3 things in framing my work, just the back and the frame, but I do measure the plexiglass in specific when I make my work, and I use acid-free mat board. And so what I do is I take that piece of plexiglass and I cut down a piece of mat board to about an 1/8 or a 1/16 of an inch smaller than the plexiglass, because the felt takes up some space. And so where the plexi fits snugly, if you put this on the plexi and then pop it into the frame, it will be a little bit too big because of the width of the felt. So you want it to be just a little bit smaller. And so I typically go, I think, an 1/8 of an inch smaller to account for the width of the felt. And then what I'll do to start is I'll take that piece that I've made and I will fit it onto the felt backing and stretch it perfectly to make sure it lines up exactly the way that I want it to. And I will pin the corners with just regular sewing pins, just like this. I'm going to make sure to tuck them out of the way, but I will go through and I'll pin each of those corners and get it nice and taut, so that way I know that the actual artwork on the front looks the way that I want it to. Okay, so I've gotten each of the corners pinned, and I am just going to dry fit, pop it out. It has these little like rolly wheels. It's really nice. Dry fit this that's been pinned to the mat board into the frame to make sure that it centers itself in the frame the way that I want it to. I hit my glass head pin in the wrong spot and it wouldn't let me fit it in, so you need to make sure that your pins are tucked out of the way. Safety pins would also work. And so I do a dry fit of my piece in the frame to make sure it looks the way that I want it to, and it's centered how I would like it. So this is how it looks in the frame with the backing empty, and because of the bulk of the felt that is behind this piece, the back that comes with it won't fit and snap into place. So the next step in this process is going to be trimming the excess felt and sewing it down so there is a smooth flat back, and then we'll be able to snap the ready-made back into place. So we're going to switch camera views to do that. Here we've got the piece ready in the frame. We've pinned each of the corners at the back to make sure it dry fits and looks the way that we want it to. You can see here. And then we're going to take it back out and we're going to work one corner at a time. And what we are going to do is cut the bulk out of this corner and then sew that seam together. We're going to unpin this corner and unfold it and take a look at how this looks here. I always recommend cleaning your table first before you do this because you are going to be getting the face of your art on your work surface, so do make sure it's clean. And we're going to cut off this corner right here. Just like that. So then when we fold the corner back, it should line up. And if it doesn't line up perfectly, you can give it another little trim. So this side needs a little bit more. Okay, now let's fold it back and see how that looks. Yep, that is going to take out a ton of the bulk. So I've already pre-threaded my embroidery needle. This is just 6 strands of regular embroidery floss. And I'm going to go in on one side and pull it up. If you have ever seen the seam on a baseball, this is the same kind of stitch. So I'm over top, and now I'm going to go under on the next side. We do want it to be over the edge there, and pull it tight. I'm just going to keep going under, pulling it, and then coming from underneath on the other side as well. Let's zoom in so you can see that a little better. Oh, wrong direction. So under, like this. And then under again. And you want to pull it pretty tight. And you're just going to keep that pattern all the way up until you run out of felt. Woo! And I do actually extend a little beyond, so these sides are obviously not the same length, and so I'll keep going a little bit farther to make sure we can flatten out a little bit of this side here. And do you see how it's smoothing out these edges to keep extending it just a little bit beyond? That is exactly what we want to see. Yeah, so we're going to do one more on this side and then one more on this side, and we'll tie this off. So I will tie this off with just a regular old overhand knot, cinch down as close as I can to the fabric. Okay, trim that edge. There we go. And now we are going to do the diagonal corner. So I like to go opposite sides and not in a circle because you don't want to end up bunching it into a circle and having a bunch of extra fabric on one end or the other. So we're going to go diagonally across from the corner that we just finished and do the same thing. We're going to cut this corner off at this angle here. Okay. Fold it back and see how those edges look. That looks great, actually. A little bit of overlap down at the bottom is just fine with me. Okay, so now I've got still plenty of thread left on that first needle, and I'm going to repeat that process. We're going to go starting on one side, just over under. It's kind of like lacing up a shoe if you were only using one shoelace. I do like to tuck my knots in so you can't really see them. No one else is going to see them unless they take apart my art, which is a whole other thing, so it doesn't really matter, but I like it that way better. Okay, and then just like we did before, we're going to extend this a little bit beyond to tighten up through the center seams there. I think I'll do one more on each side. Yeah, and then tie this one off. Okay, that's going to need another knot to keep it tighter down. Great. And sometimes, if I remember, I didn't remember here, I'll go ahead and do one more stitch through, just like this, to tuck the tail in, which is my preference. I just didn't remember to do on that one. So if you think of it, you can tuck your little tail in. All right, now I'm going to tie the end to this. Oh no, there's a knot in the middle. Okay, we're not dealing with that. I'm going to get new thread because I ended up with a knot and I don't want to take the time to deal with it right now. All right, either corner, doesn't matter now that we've gotten our diagonal. It'll help keep the tension the way that we want it on the front. So repeat the same process, and it's going to get harder and harder, kind of like a bed sheet, because you've got more and more tension. If you wanted to, no, I don't really recommend pre-cutting all the corners, because then, unless you are safety pinning them to hold them in place, or you could use quilt clips, but that's a different thing entirely. Okay, so now we've got our corner. We're going to sew it up. Okay, I'm going to do this one, or this side, a little deeper because I don't like how close I did to the edge there. I can't quite get as much tension, and I think it's going to need one more on each side before I feel done. Whoops! There we go. Okay, yeah, so this is laying much flatter. I really like how flat both sides are laying. I'm going to go ahead and tie that knot. And I did tug a little bit of the wool roving there, so I will have to go back and felt that down before we frame it, just to keep it smooth and tight, but that's prone to happening. All right, like with the other one, I'm going to tuck the tail in, trim, and that is done. We'll do our final corner. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this here. All right, fold them over, make sure they line up a bit. So I need to trim this edge just a little bit more, and this one just a little bit more. Great. So this will be our last corner, and then What I do like to do is write the name of their work and sign it inside here. I'll also sign it on the back, but you know, on the off chance it ever gets separated from the frame, I didn't tie a fat enough knot. Or down the line if someone wants to reframe it or something like that, or I want to reframe it, then I know what the work is and it's attached to the actual piece. This is bubbling more than I'd like, so we're going to have to go in a bit farther to make sure that that section is nice and smooth. Great. So you can see that it's now smooth and flat all the way around. I want to make sure I get that knot nice and tight. Tuck it through. Okay. Now we're going to felt back that one little section that popped off. Where were you? Come on back, little guy. I don't want you to be weird and fuzzy in the frame. All right, that's nice and fixed. I need a pencil. 9, 10. So this is Harmony 11. And today is Monday, April 22nd. Okay, now it's ready to go in the frame. So I've got my wooden frame here. Ooh, we should zoom out. We don't need to be so close for this. All right, so on these commercial frames, they have these little notches on the inside. This is hard to make, and that is where these little ball bearing tracks snap into place. So if you put them rotated 90 degrees, it won't lock into place because it doesn't have those tracks on the other side. And so when you look at the back of one of these frames, it comes with a little dowel because you can pop out the dowel and stand it up at the back as a base. So this angle is where I want the bottom to be. So I want it to line up like this because I know that if you want to display it on a mantle or shelf or something like that, I want it to be able to face the right way up with its little kickstand. So now I know that it lines up like this. And so I see that my ball bearings are now on the left and right sides. I'm going to take it and make sure that those bearings are lined up. And it just pops right into place. If you want to, you can screw it into place so that it can't be popped open, but it's quite secure, so I don't typically do that. And so now this little foot will hold it up. And then the little dowel has a storage spot right here. And then for a piece this small, I will screw in later on a D-ring right here. So you can hang it from a nail right here, or you can put the foot and make it sideways if you really wanted to, which, you know, is not my preference, but I won't judge you if that's what you do, or you can put it at the bottom. And so now I'm going to sign the back as well. because I'm assuming that you're not taking it apart. Writing on wood is harder than writing on mat board. Okay, I've signed it. Pop this little guy in here. And then the last thing that I do, this is something I've only started doing recently because I have my work in different venues now, and I want to make sure that people, if they are rearranging the gallery or anything like that, know that the work they're looking at is mine. And so I'll take my business card, some acid-free double-sided tape, and I put it on the back of my business card, so the side with the pretty picture but not all of my information. And then I put the business card in the corner. I just tuck it in. Unfortunately, that covers up my signature a little bit, but then if you are in a gallery and you're moving stuff around and you want to confirm whose piece is whose, my information is right there. I also will add a little removable price sticker on the back as well for that situation to make sure that everything that you need to know about the piece lives on the piece, whereas when the piece just stays in my home space before it sells, I know all that information in my head. All right, let's pop you back in, but not so forcefully. And so now this piece is framed. It's ready to go. I need to photograph it, and then I can list it and sell it, and it can go off to its final home. This video is getting quite long already, but we are going to talk through this style of framing next and the third one. But I think I will, for the sake of time, cut those tutorials just a little bit short for the sake of it still being a watchable length video. I had already prepped this before the poll closed, so I can show you what it looks like on the inside, but I will not be redoing it from the beginning like I did with that one. It's my only piece in this style right now. So what I did was I measured a piece of that acid-free mat board to be a little bit wider than the opening that I've got here. And then I fitted my art centered on it based on the frame opening. And I did a running stitch all the way around. And then I did kind of a star just to smooth out those edges a little bit and make it more secure. And then I signed, forgot to date this. I'll have to look up the date. Of when I finished it. I keep it in my planner. And then I just put a little extra piece of tape on the back of this to give it a little bit more depth because this is a bit more height to fill, and I want to make sure it doesn't slide around. I haven't actually signed this piece yet on the front. That's why it's not fully finished for me. Anyways, so I've got this on the front, and then this piece is the frame face. So this is laser cut wood. It's 1/4 inch. It's 3 layers, 3 rings of wood that have been glued together in a stack. This face, the opening is like 2 7/8 of an inch or something to accommodate a 3-inch size, and the border is, I think, 3/4 of an inch. So that way it gives enough space all the way around, and it comes to me unstained. I worked with a laser cutter to get these figured out. I do need to sand this down and kind of do some finishing before this piece is really done, whereas the other one is fully done. And then I have these backs made with my name engraved on them. It says Amy Reader, and then a keyhole as well. And this is the exact same size as the outer face. So I just make a little sandwich like this, and I ultimately would glue these pieces together. So I take this and I dry fit it again. And because this has a bit of a wood motif, I actually want to make sure that I'm lining it up aesthetically with the grain on the face of the frame. So I'm going to turn it so the wood grain kind of matches up, and I want it to hang this way. So my keyhole will go right where my thumb is. And this has a little bit of space, so I might, before I actually glue it all shut, I would stack a few more pieces of mat board inside just to fill up that space. But then I will go in and apply a really thin layer of wood glue around the perimeter here. Clamp this back on, making sure that my keyhole faces the way that I want it to, and let that glue set. And then this is done, ready to hang, ready to go. So that's how this framing process goes for me. It is something that I know that these are not commercially available. I've had them custom made, but if that inspires you to figure out some of your own methods for framing your work, it's just a little art sandwich with some acid-free mat board and my work sewn onto it. The last way that I frame my work is inside of these nice embroidery hoops. These were made by Auburn Hoops. Unfortunately, they have closed down their business, and so there are a few other commercially made embroidery hoop frame companies that I will link out for you all. Modern Hoopla, Stitch Life Studio, and I think it's like ASMC LLC, I think is the other one, and they all make commercially made embroidery hoop frames. For most of them, you would keep your work in the embroidery hoop that you used. And so this is the exact same way that I would back that embroidery hoop if I were putting it into that kind of a frame. So when I'm working, I bunch up all the excess because it just gets in my way, especially with needle felting. I really don't want to needle felt the back to front. I find this so much more efficient than fighting with the extra fabric all the time. And if you have ever done one of my kits, you'll know that if I'm combining needle felting and embroidery, I prefer to work on a double layer. I really prefer quilter's cotton underneath my layer of felt, because especially with embroidery and beadwork and stuff like that, it adds so much more stability to the work and it can just tolerate a bit more. Whereas felting, if I'm just doing felting, I'll just do that on a sheet of felt. But if we're going to keep adding more to the surface, I want something with a weave to really give it that support. So you can see that I've got a layer of quilter's cotton and a layer of felt in here. And so I'm just unlooping my quick basting threads to take a look at what I'm working with here. All right, so the first thing I'll do is trim the quilter's cotton, and then we'll work with the felt. So this is about 2 inches. So I've got that cut down, and I will bind these up independent of each other. So I'm going to take a pretty long piece of embroidery floss, all 6 strands, and I'm just going to do a running stitch all the way around. This does not have to be perfect or anything, it just needs to go through the majority of the fabric. The running stitch is just going back and forth between the fabric, up, down. It is also what you do is if you're doing like a quick basting stitch or anything like that, it's just under, over kind of. If you think of somebody miming the act of hand sewing, they will usually do something like this or a whip stitch, and it's really nice because you can tighten it. Okay, so now we're back to the start. We're gonna pull off my needle and we're gonna take both tails and tie them together and cinch this down. You wanna get it pretty tight. And give it a couple of ties. And trim those tails. So now we've got the quilter's cotton accounted for. And if you're only working with one layer of fabric, whether it's felt or quilter's cotton or some other fabric, you would only need to do this once. I'm doing this twice and I find it easier to do the layers individually because it minimizes bulk and it keeps everything smoother and flatter behind here. But if you're just doing one layer of fabric because you are not doing this kind of thing, you'll only have to do this once before you'll move on to adding a back covering, but we're gonna repeat that process and I'm gonna skip that so that way we can get to the back covering because I think that's a bit more exciting than watching me do the running stitch for another 5 minutes. So now this has been cinched down on both sides and the next step is going to be to cut a piece of felt to a circle about a 1/2 inch on all sides, so an inch smaller than this circle, and we are going to sew that down to cover up and seal up the back. What I've done here is I have taken my cutout circle of felt that I cut out to the right size, a little less than an inch smaller than this interior circle. I've pinned it in place. I've got one pin right here to indicate where I want the up to be. This is the top, oh my goodness, this is the top of the piece. I have these branded leather pieces that have my logo on them and I've sewed that down and I've got a curved needle thread through here and I'm going to stitch this to the base fabric. So now that I've got the entire area stitched, I'm going to sew on a small hanging loop that centers over this pin right here. And to do that, I've doubled up on embroidery floss on my curved needle. And we're gonna start to bury some thread through here. We'll come up right about here and we'll do a little loop and then bury the thread back down here again. So I like to make sure that my knots are not visible. Knots are not. And so to do that, I'll angle my needle pretty far into the fabric, like this. And then I won't pull it out all the way. I'll push it back like that. Okay, so now I can trim this, pull that, and then I'm going to do that a couple more times, making sure to get through the fabric underneath as well as up through here to really secure it. So I'm going through multiple layers underneath, popping it up, and I can feel I've pulled through, but I don't want to pull through this top, so it's easier to push it back underneath and come up over here. This just adds a bit more security because we're distributing the embroidery floss in more places throughout the fabric. These pieces are pretty light, so I don't have to worry too much, but I like the extra security. There we go. So now that I've done that several times, I'm going to go ahead and aim to pop up right here. Perfect. Now, if you crochet, this will be really familiar to you. It is just a foundation stitch. But if you do not crochet, I make a little chain stitch. So I've got my thread folded over and I pull through as if I were making a slip knot. And then I try and slide that slip knot as close to the base as possible. And then you just pull the working thread through again and cinch it down, and you do this several times until you get the length of a hanging loop that you want. Okay, and then once you have the length that you want, you pass the whole needle through and cinch it down. And then I'm going to go back in a minute and tighten up this gap so there's not so much gapping here. But I'm going to do, you want a little bit of room, and I'm going back down through the base knot to really secure it in. And we're going to keep securing this to the base a couple more times, and then we'll come back and tighten that up as well, and it'll be done. So this time I'm going to come back up next to that knot right there, and I'm going to go down through it again to secure it. And I'll come through the edge like this, and now we're going to go secure it over on the other side. We can take out our needle or pin. We want our needle still. So this is going to take a little bit of finagling to work it over to the other side. Hazel's making all sorts of weird sounds right now. And nope, I'm losing thread chicken. So I'll need just a little bit more thread to actually accomplish this. So we'll snip that and we'll get a little bit more thread in here before we actually are able to tie this off and be done. Okay, now I'm trying to just bury the extra embroidery floss so I can trim it off and everything. Okay, we want just a smidgen more since we did lose thread chicken. All right, and we'll once again bury the knot underneath and we'll come up right next to this hole. Now we're going to go through this chunky knot at the base and sew it down a bit more securely. And we don't want to keep going back down through the same hole. We want to keep making new holes next to it. That's going to help a lot with security. There we go. And we don't need to pull it too tightly. We just really want to reinforce those anchor points to the base fabric. These pieces will ultimately get hung by a nail or a small hook right here. And so you just want to reinforce the potential strain points, which are anywhere it's not doubled up, which are the 2 points down here. So that's why I like to go back over them a couple times to really add some reinforcements. One of the things that I work really hard to do for these pieces is to keep my backs really, really clean and smooth, so that way it looks, what I'm aiming for is what I call gallery ready, right? I want it to look ready to go on the wall of a gallery as soon as it leaves my studio. So that way it looks clean and professional and yeah. All right, and so now I'm going to take this one over this way a bit, but I am done. And we'll tie this off one more time. Ooh, there we go. And just rubbing your fingernail over some of those needle holes should be enough to disguise them. But if they end up quite large, you can always take your single needle felting needle and go in parallel and just kind of nudge some of those fibers to cover up those holes. The same with like a spot like this where it's a little out of wonk because of the knot. You can just kind of smoosh it around a little with that single needle felting needle. Okay, so this piece is framed. It's been a little squished, so it'll take some lint rolling and some fluffing, but the felting's pretty durable. And that, oh, let's zoom back out so you can see. That is how I frame my round pieces. And again, this is the same process I would use if this was in a regular embroidery hoop, not just a frame hoop. And it's the same thing that I would do if I were putting a regular embroidery hoop inside of a frame hoop, because there are ones that are made to go in conjunction with those. And then we finished this one earlier, and this was done in a conventional frame, and I would do the same thing if I were using any kind of frame. I would take out the glass or plexi or whatever came in it. I would mount my work on acid-free mat board, and I would set it into the frame. If you didn't have one that snaps into place, it's the kind with the back with the little hinges or anything like that, I would do the exact same process for that as well. And that covers all of my framing secrets this month. And be sure to check back soon to vote on next month's tutorial. All right, thank you, friends.